All right, our next lesson, 3.7, is about solving inequalities with negatives. Now, we've seen negatives in some of our inequalities before, but the negatives that we'll see in these examples change things up a little bit. And so we want to talk about how that's going to affect your inequality when you're solving it, and how that will ultimately affect your graph. The question we're really trying to answer with this lesson is, when do I flip the inequality sign? Because we've already seen that that can happen, and we'll review that again. But when do I flip that inequality sign in the context of solving the equation, and specifically when there's negatives involved? So we want to understand when that is, so that we can make sure we're solving it correctly and make sure we're graphing it correctly. So this is the question we're really trying to answer. When do I flip the inequality sign? So we've already talked about one place where we know we flip the inequality symbol, or the inequality sign. And that's when our x, or our variable, is on the right side of the inequality, like what we have here, 7 is less than x. Okay? So normally when we're graphing, it's easier to look at the variable on the left side, and so we flip things around in order to make sure we're understanding it correctly. So when it says 7 is less than x, we can switch the x and the 7, and then we have to flip our inequality sign. So remember, we talked about this in a previous lesson. If you're going to flip your inequality, you also have to turn the inequality sign. So that's one case and where we're going to flip it. And we've already talked about that one. Let's look at the other case where we flip the inequality symbol. The other case where we flip the inequality sign, and this is what we'll be talking about today, is when we have negative numbers, and specifically when you multiply or divide by a negative number. Now, just because you have a negative doesn't mean that you're going to change the sign, but when you specifically multiply or divide by a negative number, you're going to flip the inequality symbol, because multiplying or dividing that negative changes the equality of the expression, and so we need to flip that sign to make sure everything is staying. It's an equivalent inequality. Okay? So make sure that it's staying correct. And that it's accurately displaying what our solution is going to be. So that's what we're going to look at today. If you divide or multiply by a negative number, you reverse the inequality symbol. All right, before we look at some examples, let's look at the note here at the top of this page, solving inequalities with negatives. Okay, the note at the top says, when multiplying or dividing each side of an inequality by the same negative number, okay, when multiplying or dividing each side of an inequality by the same negative number, the direction of the inequality symbol must be reversed to produce an equivalent inequality. Okay? So when multiplying or dividing each side of an inequality by the same negative number, okay, the direction of the inequality symbol must be reversed to produce an equivalent inequality. Okay? So let me clarify just one thing with that. That is only when you're multiplying or dividing by a negative. It's not when you're multiplying or dividing with a negative. So like if I'm taking, if I have, negative 6x is less than 12, if I divide by negative 6, then I'm going to have to switch the sign. Okay? But if I did it like this, 6x is less than negative 12, and I just divide by 6, I don't have to switch the sign. Okay? I would keep the sign the same in that situation. And we'll talk about that again in a second, but just to make sure that's clear. You have to actually be dividing or multiplying by a negative in order for that sign to switch. So let's look at some examples. A, solve the following inequalities, then graph each solution. So in A, we have 2 is less than y divided by negative 3. 2 is less than y divided by negative 3. So the first thing I notice here is that my variable is on the right side. And my variable is on the right side. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch around my inequality so that I can get my variable on the left side. So remember, when we do that, we just switch it around. Y, so I make this a little smaller, divided by negative 3 and then 2, so I just switch them on their sides, but then I have to flip the sign. Remember, this is a situation where we would flip the sign because we turn things around. Okay? We switch around the variable with everything. So it's y divided by negative 3 is now greater than 2. Okay? And now I'm going to solve for y. Well, remember, when we're dividing, the opposite of that is multiplication. So I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 3 because I want to get rid of my negative 3 under my y to get that y by itself. So I multiply by negative 3, leaves me with y. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Now if you notice, I've multiplied by a negative number. Okay, I've multiplied by a negative number, and so I have to switch my sign. Okay, y is less than negative 6. Okay, so you notice now when I actually switched my sign twice. I first flipped it around because I turned my inequality around, right? I put the variable on the other side. And then because I multiplied by negative, I had to switch the sign again. All right, so you want to keep track of that. I actually had 2 of them in there. Not all of them will have that, but you want to keep track of that. So this is my final solution. Y is less than negative 6. So let's go ahead and graph this. Remember, I can put my numbers anywhere I want to on the number line. Just want to make sure to have my solution number, negative 6, and then leave space for numbers that are bigger and numbers that are smaller. So my solution is y is less than negative 6. So I have an open circle at negative 6 because it's just less than, and then my arrow will be going off to the left, okay? Because we're talking about the values that are less than negative 6. And that's it. So it's solving like we have been. We just need to keep track, like if we multiply or divide by negative, we're going to have to switch around the sign. Okay? But it's pretty similar to what we have been doing. So let's look at another one. Let's look at B. Change my color here. We have negative m is less than or equal to negative 5. Okay, so I notice my variable is on the left side, so I don't have to switch anything there. Okay? But I need to figure out what m is equal to. Now, some of you might think it's like, well, it's already m. Well, actually, it's a negative m, and that's different than positive m. So I don't want it to be negative m, I want it to be positive m. So if you ever have a variable that's just negative like that, or you just have the variable, what you can do is divide by negative 1. Okay? Divide by negative 1, and I have to do that to both sides. And that's going to make your variable positive, okay, when you divide by negative 1. So that's m, and negative 5 divided by negative 1 is positive 5. Now because I divided by a negative number, I'm also going to have to switch my inequality symbol. So it was less than or equal to, but now it's going to be greater than or equal to. Okay? Notice how the sign flipped. It was less than or equal to, now it's greater than or equal to. So m is greater than or equal to 5. So I can graph that onto my number line. Again, put 5 anywhere you want on the number line, just leave space for numbers that are bigger and numbers that are smaller. It's greater than or equal to, and so that is a closed circle, closed point. And then my arrow to the right. And we're talking about the numbers that are bigger than 5. Okay, bigger than 5. So again, because we had that negative variable, I divided by negative 1 on both sides to make it positive m, but because I divided by negative, I had to switch the sign. Okay, let's look at a couple more. I know C and D say try it on your own, but we're going to go ahead and do these together, just to make sure we're all on the same page here right now. So C says negative 9m is greater than or equal to 63. And so we're looking for what m is, so that's negative 9m. Remember, that means multiplication when the number and the variable are together like that. So we're going to divide by negative 9 on both sides. So m, because the negative 9's 0 out, and 63 divided by negative 9 is negative 7. But because I divided by a negative number, I'm going to have to switch my sign. It was greater than or equal to, but now it's less than or equal to. So this is my solution. M is less than or equal to negative 7. I'll graph that onto my number line. Less than or equal to -7, so I'm going to close circle at -7, and then arrow to the left. Talking about the numbers that are less than -7. So I divided by a negative number, so I had to switch the sign, and then graph it. Let's do one last one. D. X divided by -5 is greater than -5. Okay, X divided by -5 is greater than -5. So what is our solution here? So if this is divided by, I'm going to multiply by -5, and do that to both sides. -5 cancels out there. X, -5 times -5 is positive 25. But because I multiplied by that -5, I have to switch the sign. It becomes less than. So X is less than 25. And that's my solution. So 25, 26. And then those that are smaller than 25. This says X is less than 25, so I'll do an open circle 25 and draw my arrow to the left. Okay. X is less than 25. So on that one again, I'd multiplied by a negative number, and so I had to switch my inequality symbol. The solving is the same as that we have been doing. They just either doing the opposite operation on both sides, but you want to make sure you're keeping track of, did I multiply by or divide by negative? Then I'll need to flip my sign. So to recap, when do you flip the inequality sign? Only in two situations. One, when X is on the right side, and you flip the whole inequality, okay, then you'll change the sign. Like what we saw with 7 is less than X, it becomes X is greater than 7. Or with what we're looking at today, when you multiply or divide by a negative number. Okay, if you multiply or divide by a negative number, you're going to switch your sign in your final answer. And that is where the situations are where we would flip the inequality sign. And so you want to keep those in mind and be careful that you're not just randomly flipping it, that you're actually flipping it when it's in those two situations.